Hello again. Have you ever thought about what it takes to work with hedgehogs? Apart from some obvious opportunities like becoming a vet or becoming the manager of a hedgehog hospital or hedgehog sanctuary, there are other ways to do it. My next guest talks about his life and work as a published author and public speaker on hedgehog conservation. Hugh Warwick talks about his life and work as a hedgehog conservationist, and I began by asking him what jobs or volunteer opportunities are available working with hedgehogs.
What jobs are available with hedgehogs? Now, there's an interesting starter. The easiest way to get involved with helping hedgehogs is to start on your own patch. So to look at what land you've got agency over. Now, whether that is, if you're lucky enough to have a garden, you start with your garden. If you haven't got a garden, start with the people who manage the parks and the playing fields around you. And start talking to the people who are actually managing these things and start to push them to try and embrace sort of the values of, which we espouse through the campaign Hedgehog Street, which is one of the things I'm involved with. I mean, next step up, I suppose, you find your local hedgehog rescue, the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. I'm a spokesperson for. They've got a list of probably 800 or so hedgehog rescues around the country. So get in touch with the Hedgehog Society to find out your local rescue. Get in touch with your local rescue and say, hey, I really, really love hedgehogs. How about I come in and help mucking out cages and feeding baby hedgehogs and things like that. Next step up from that, look and see which bit of research is being done in your area. There's probably somebody somewhere doing some research on hedgehogs. Get in touch with the Wildlife Trust. The Hedgehog Street campaign, we help fund researchers all over the country. Maybe there's somebody doing a PhD near you. Maybe they need a field worker to help them do the field work. Because I can assure you, having done months of this stuff, wandering around fields at night on your own gets lonesome. You end up naming all your hedgehogs, obviously, because you've got to have somebody to talk to, but it's really nice to have other individuals to help you do the work.
Hugh, please can you describe what it involves being a fellow of Oxford Brookes University?
I just do a few lectures. That's all it is.
Hugh, are there any conservation projects anywhere in the world working exclusively with hedgehogs for their captive breeding?
So we don't have, as far as I know, anybody doing the breeding work. And also, in fact, very few other countries have the same level of interest and investment in hedgehogs as we do in the UK.
Hugh, what is the purpose of the British Hedgehog Preservation Society?
The British Hedgehog Preservation Society was set up, 1982, I think it was now. It was Major Adrian Coles, who retired from the army, and he was in Shropshire, and he found hedgehogs dead in cattle grids. And this just sort of sparked his concern. It's like, well, this is ridiculous. Cattle grids are all over the countryside, and hedgehogs fall into them. They simply can't climb out over the edges. The edges were too high. So he started by putting bricks inside them. And that was enough, just a little step up to let the hedgehogs be able to climb out. But this began as a campaign. I vaguely remember it on kids' TV, people talking about this. And this campaign grew and grew and grew. Now there's a British standard design for cattle grids. And this all came from this work. And the British Hedgehog Preservation Society is actually quite interested to see whether people are finding cattle grids with these ramps put in, because obviously that wasn't a call to retrofit. It was just saying new ones had to have the sloping ramp in it. And also to see whether hedgehogs are still being caught in existing cattle grids. Now, that was the start of it. That was a very, very simple start of it. But then it became obvious that there was such a great love for the hedgehog with the volume of people who are involved with helping on the cattle grid story, that he set up the society. And to begin with, it was very much a case of just trying to get people together to share their love of hedgehogs, share their knowledge about hedgehogs. Pat Morris, Dr. Pat Morris, now retired, but he's been the scientific director for years. He's began the scientific ecological study of hedgehogs back in the 1960s. So it began to become more scientific in basis. We do offer advice. So Hedgehog House in Shropshire, just outside Ludlow, people will phone through and they say, we found a hedgehog, what do we do? You'll get directed to your local hedgehog rescue. britishhedgehogs.org.uk is the website, if I remember rightly. And then we also help fund research. So there's no point doing all of this work if it's not backed up by sound scientific and ecological study. So we help fund that work. We work very closely with the People's Trust for Endangered Species on that front as well, with our Hedgehog Street campaign. And we also offer us sort of an advisory service for people setting up hedgehog rescues. We help run a sort of day-long training course just for people interested in getting in touch with first aid skills for looking after hedgehogs. That takes place at the Vale Wildlife Rescue Centre down in Tewkesbury. So there's a whole range of things that we do. It's a very small organisation. We've got about 11,000 members, and I think there's 2 full-time members of staff. I mean, I get paid a bag of peanuts once every month or so. So I mean, I'm not staff. I do just bits of work as their spokesperson. So it's a very, very small bunch of people keeping it going, a few part-time staff helping. There's a hogalog, catalogs have a hogalog. So hedgehog stuff you can buy. So yes, it's a small little entity which punches way above its weight, actually.
Hugh, you're a published author. Can you give tips on how to become an author, please?
So to become a published author and remain sane, here are 3 top tips. Okay, 1, buy a house 25 years ago. 2, win the lottery. 3, marry well. Those are the only ways to actually maintain sanity whilst doing this. The only one of those I managed was the buying a house 25 years ago. That means, so when I do lectures in creative writing, I'd say to students, I say, it's unfair. I have this massive advantage, which is why I'm very happy to share with the students everything I know about it, because I really feel that sense of good fortune on my part that I was able to, by dint of age and by dint of the fact that I lost a grandparent, got some money, able to put a deposit on a house. Simple as that. Which meant that I was able to dedicate my time to doing something which, certainly to begin with, really does not earn you lots of money. Top tips to become a published author: write. That's the best thing, and keep writing, and find avenues for your writing. So I wrote articles for magazines for free. Then I wrote articles for magazines and got paid. I wrote articles for newspapers. I wrote reports for various development and conservation NGOs. I do anything like that. So publish. Get stuff published. If all you can do is publish online, but try and get something in print. Mainly because it makes you feel much better. Seeing something of yours in print makes you feel really, really good. And it also makes your parents feel very good too, because then it's a tangible thing. So write and write and write again. And I would say, if you have got a burning desire to be an author, and you've got a subject which you care about really deeply, then do it in every spare moment you've got. I will give you the one lesson I was given. So when I was radio tracking hedgehogs in Devon, Pat Morris, I'd mentioned before, he'd brought along an old friend of his, Ros Kidman Cox. Now, Ros was the editor of my favorite magazine, BBC Wildlife magazine. And I read that absolutely religiously, got it every month. She spent too long in the office. Pat said, come along, have an evening spent wandering around the Devon countryside looking at hedgehogs. And what she said at the end of that evening, she said, I'd like you to write a feature for my magazine. And I remember really clearly my answer, my question in response was, how? I'd never done anything like that before. I'd written up scientific reports, I'd essays at school. That was about it, really. And she said, well, it's very simple, really. We've just spent the evening wandering around the countryside, and you've been chatting about the work you do. And you speak coherently. You've told me the story. It all makes perfect sense. That's why I want the story. All you've got to do when you get home is pretend you're in the pub with your mates and you're telling them what you've been up to, and just write it down. Simple as that. And that is so when I'm given a 3-hour lecture slot, I have to say, here's the lesson, the rest of it's padding, but there you go, that's it. So in terms of doing the writing, you can spend a lot of time trying to be clever, but actually what I do is just talk to myself. So I have a shed at the bottom of the garden, because I'm out there, and when I'm trying to get point A to point B, you do what you would do in a conversation. You talk about it. And so admittedly, I'm talking to myself an awful lot. But so that's the top tip. Other things, there's no such thing as a routine which works for everybody, because nobody does. I mean, some people need a routine. Some people just do it when they can. How about an agent? I like agents. Agents are good. But actually, it's hard to get an agent. That's the first port of call. So if you're interested, really, really interested in getting a book done, and you've got the idea, then I would suggest you find a book a bit like your book. Go into a bookshop, wander around a bookshop, find a book which yours would go next to on the shelf, and then look and see, because the acknowledgements will contain an acknowledgement of thanks to their agent. Find out who their agent is, drop them a line.
Hugh, please, can you describe your career from start to date?
Well, it depends what perspective you're using. If you're using a sort of financial metric, I would say probably disappointing. But in terms of value for entertainment, bloody brilliant. Moments of despair, obviously, but finished a degree and a master's, went off to Africa, doing one of those student projects, came back from that, having met an amazing artist woman, and we moved in together in Manchester. And I was working there in the campaign world. I was working at a place called the One World Centre, a workers' cooperative, which was a resource centre for development and conservation, environmental peace campaigns. And so that was my sort of first step into regular and consistent work, other than all of the temp jobs that we all did when we were younger. And that led me, no, it didn't lead me by coincidence, just by sheer madness. I kept doing the hedgehog work in the background, and was off down in Dungeness looking for hedgehogs, radio tracking hedgehogs in Devon, as I already mentioned. And while I was radio tracking the hedgehogs in Devon, I had borrowed a friend of mine's radio recording equipment. It was a professional Walkman. It was like a big version of your Walkman you'd wear, and you put your headphones on, and wandered around the fields, again, talking to myself. A lot of this talking to myself. And I sent the tapes off to the BBC's Natural History Unit. They had a radio program called the Natural History Program, which I used to listen to again avidly. And they got back in touch with me and just said, that's brilliant, do more. And the piece that we made ended up being Pick of the Week and Pick of the Year, and winning the department a Silver Sony Award. So it was like it was my interest. It's the first bit of radio I ever made, and probably the best, which is rather disappointing. But then they lured me in, so I worked for the BBC for a year as a researcher in the Natural History Radio department. I had an amazing time, but realised I wasn't wasn't really kitted out for hierarchies, structure, conventional jobs, and went freelance in 1994. And 1994 to now, God, that's a long time. I haven't had a job since. So I write articles, used to write reports, as I've mentioned, for NGOs and things. Now I write books, but I'm also a photographer. So, I mean, just last night I was photographing an amazing concert by a period music ensemble called The Instruments of Time and Truth in Oxford, in the gorgeous Sheldonian Theatre. I have a strange niche. I photograph a lot of choirs. My son was a chorister for 5 years, so I'm spent so long in chapel photographing people making absolutely beautiful music, and I do a lot of public speaking. So between all of these things, photography, writing, public speaking, and the campaigns, God, and the hedgehog stuff, lots of campaigning stuff. I just about make it through, actually. Yes.
Hugh, how does somebody go about becoming a public speaker on, for example, hedgehogs?
I will always suggest you form an intimate relationship with the Women's Institute. The WI first approached me to talk about something completely different. I was editing a magazine about genetic engineering, genetically modified foods and things, and genetically engineered organisms and people. And it was all about the ethics of it. And the WI asked me to come along and do a series of talks So I think I did 6 talks in 2 days around the various meetings, and they were so impressed by what I did. They said, "Do you talk about anything else?" And I said, "Well, I have spent by that stage, sort of 15, 20 years studying hedgehogs. Do a lot of talk. I could talk about hedgehogs." And they said, "Okay, fine." And I started getting booked in to do WI talks, and the Women's Institute talks then led to the Gardening Club's talks, which led to the Towns Women's Guild talks, which led to the University of the Third Age, and occasionally the Probus business lunches. Mainly, I go to places with cake, and over time with that, I was doing an awful lot of it, and then finding that you're getting people laughing, and it's really nice. And so anyway, each book I did, I'd then take those talks on tour as well. So yeah, you do the bookshop thing, and you go around. So when Linescape, so I was showing off my books, wasn't I? Here we go. Got to promote. Here we go. This is the last sort of big book I wrote. It's called Linescapes. Let me get the lights out of the way. Here we go. All about habitat fragmentation. It's one of those. It sort of it came out of the work I've been doing on hedgehogs and other species, but it's looking at how the natural world copes with the linear features that we put in place. So the roads, the railways, the canals, ditches, dikes, hedges, and how these can be agents of connectivity or agents of fragmentation in the landscape. And so when that book came out, I was then off on the Wildlife Trust sort of circuit, doing the AGMs and things, talking to them, doing the public speaking. Find your audience, and the WI is my perfect audience because they like rude jokes and they give you cake.
Can you describe the process of researching, composing, and writing your books, Hugh?
I watched my wife grow as she was pregnant with both our kids, and I saw that process and saw the discomfort that comes along the way, and the complete agony of the actual production of the newborn. It's not too far off it sometimes. No, I mean it is at times utterly devastatingly awful, and at times it's utterly brilliant and wonderful.
Let's say that somebody feeds their hedgehogs in their back garden from, they appear in the back garden in April. They're feeding them. They're following all the correct guidance, and they go on holiday for 2 weeks. They can't feed the hedgehogs. Hedgehogs stop coming. What can they do when they come back? Should they carry on? Will hedgehogs return to the area?
The hedgehogs will just go and find food elsewhere. When they find a regular source of food, they will go back to that place, but they don't stop looking for food. The ideal is you don't need to feed hedgehogs in your garden. The ideal is your garden is wild enough anyway, so that it's got an entire array of macro invertebrates there for the hedgehog to eat. And the idea is that your neighbour's garden is equally wild too, and it's got a lovely pond, a wildlife pond with a beach, a ramp in it, so the hedgehogs can drink from the water, so that we're not needed. But if you're doing it, the hedgehogs will simply eat the food which is there, and then they'll go off and eat some food elsewhere, and then they'll go off and eat some food elsewhere. They've got 8 hours to fill. They're in your garden for 10 minutes.
Hugh, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Oh, buy my books, please. Available in all good bookshops and bad online ones too. And if you have bought my books, the great thing would be leave reviews online, because that really helps in terms of pushing the books up the thingy. I mean, it sounds entirely self-serving, but actually, as I said before, I'm utterly freelance. Oh, I have a thingy. I have a buy me a coffee page. My social media plus my buy me a coffee thing is at Hedgehog Hugh. Instagram, Twitter, all these things, plus the fundraising site Buy Me a Coffee.
Hugh, does the world still have bookshops?
Oh my goodness, bookshops are wonderful. I don't know about you, but I mean, I just love physical books.
Hugh, you're the author of several books on hedgehogs, other ecological books as well. It's been absolutely fascinating, very, very funny. Hugh Warwick, thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal channel.
Thanks a lot, John.